There are moments when time seems to stand still, not because of its beauty, but because of the weight of an event that could collapse an entire geopolitical system that has existed for decades. On the night of January 3, 2020, on the road leading to Baghdad International Airport, Iraq, the air was thick with tension. Two black SUVs were rolling through the night, carrying figures whose existence was the terror of the West and the hope of an entire Middle Eastern axis of power. Suddenly, from the stratosphere, the invisible eyes of the US military locked onto the target. A Hellfire missile tore through the night. A massive fireball rose, incinerating everything. In that wreckage, people could only identify a body through a red ruby stone ring on the left ring finger. That was Qasem Soleimani. In Washington, people popped champagne to celebrate the elimination of one of the world's most dangerous terrorists. But in Tehran, millions poured into the streets, mourning a saint, a father, a symbol of national pride. Why could the death of a single general make the whole world hold its breath for fear of a third world war? Why did a man who never nominally led a major conventional army have the power to redraw the map of the Middle East? To understand that, we must go back in time, back to the early days when the Empire of the Night called Quds was formed. The Quds Force was not born naturally. It was the child of pain and aspiration from the 1979 Iranian Islamic Revolution. After the fall of the Shah's regime, Iran fell into complete isolation. They were surrounded by enemies, Saddam Hussein's Iraq to the west, pro-American Arab nations to the south, and the hostility of the two superpowers, the US and the Soviet Union. In that hanging by a thread context, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, was established. And within the IRGC, a most special and mysterious unit was born, the Quds Force. Quds, a name meaning Jerusalem. From the very name, Iran asserted its ambition, not just to stop at Iran's borders, but to extend its influence to the holy site of the Islamic world, challenging the existence of Israel and US power in the region. However, Quds did not choose the path of direct confrontation. They understood that an Iran exhausted after war could not compete with the opponent's aircraft carriers or cruise missiles. They chose another path, asymmetric warfare. Quds began searching for the forgotten, the persecuted Shiite minorities throughout the Middle East, from the valleys of Lebanon to the sands of the Gulf. They brought more than just guns and bullets, they brought an ideology, an organization, and a vision. Quds taught them, you don't need a strong nation to win, you only need an iron faith and a smart tactic. For a sophisticated machine like Quds to operate, it needed a soul. That soul was Qasem Soleimani. Born into a poor farming family in the village of Kanati Malik, Kerman province, the young boy Qasem soon learned the harshness of life. At the age of 13, he had to leave his hometown to work as a laborer to pay off his father's debt. With no formal military degree and no aristocratic blood, Soleimani joined the IRGC when the Iran-Iraq War broke out in 1980. It was that 8-year-long burning battlefield that forged a different Soleimani. While other generals commanded from bunkers, Soleimani was famous for always appearing in the most dangerous places, eating at the same table and sleeping in the same trenches as his soldiers. He did not lead by command, he led by empathy. When he took over the Quds Force in the late 1990s, the world still did not know who he was. Western intelligence reports at that time only mentioned a vague name. But in reality, Soleimani had begun to weave his web. He crossed borders without a passport, he spoke to tribal leaders in their own language, and he turned fragmented militia groups into formidable political military entities. His strategy was clear: if Iran wanted to be safe, Iran's borders must lie at the Mediterranean, not at the Zagros Mountains. He began building what was called the Axis of Resistance, an informal but tight alliance connecting Tehran, Baghdad, Damascus, and Beirut. In 2003, when American tanks entered Baghdad to topple Saddam Hussein, the world thought Iran would be the next target. In Tehran, leaders feared a pincer scenario, the US in the east, Afghanistan, and the US in the west, Iraq. But for Qasem Soleimani, he saw a once-in-a-millennium opportunity in the ruins of the Baath regime. Iran's greatest enemy in the region, Saddam Hussein, had been eliminated by the US. The mission of Quds now was not to drive the US out immediately with a conventional army, but to turn Iraq into a quagmire that would prevent Washington from ever having a free hand to attack Iran. Soleimani began implementing a campaign that CIA experts later called the perfect double-sided policy. On one hand, he sent pro-Iranian politicians in Iraq to cooperate with the Americans to build a new government. On the other hand, he secretly transported tons of weapons, especially explosively formed penetrators, EFPs, across the border to supply Shiite militia groups. Imagine a general who could have breakfast with the Iraqi Prime Minister in the US-protected Green Zone, but by the afternoon be sitting in a basement in Sadr City directing militia groups to attack the US military itself. That was Soleimani. He did not need tens of thousands of elite troops. He only needed small, loyal groups that understood the terrain. He turned Iraq into a battlefield where the enemy did not know who was friend or foe. US officials in Baghdad often recounted that they sometimes received brief messages on their desks from Soleimani with content such as, "I hope you are enjoying the peace in Baghdad, I am Qasem Soleimani and I know what you are doing." His presence became an invisible psychological pressure. The Quds Force succeeded in turning Iraq from a hostile nation to Iran into a nation where every important political decision had to pass through Tehran's nod. To understand the power of Quds, one cannot fail to mention Hezbollah in Lebanon. This is not just an armed group, but the firstborn child that Quds painstakingly nurtured since the 1980s. Soleimani turned Hezbollah into a standard model for all other proxy groups. He did not just provide missiles, he provided a social management system, hospitals, schools, and a sophisticated intelligence apparatus. The 2006 war between Israel and Hezbollah was proof. With the support of Quds, a militia group could stall and inflict heavy damage on one of the most modern militaries in the world. From the success in Lebanon, Soleimani replicated this model in Yemen with the Houthi group and the Gaza Strip with Hamas. Each group has its own goal, but all lie within an overall strategy, creating a ring of fire surrounding Iran's rivals. Whenever Israel or Saudi Arabia wanted to pressure Iran, they saw missiles flying out from Yemen or Gaza. Quds created a tactical position where Iran could attack its enemies without firing a single bullet from its own territory. That is the definition of an extraterritorial empire. In the summer of 2014, the world was horrified as the shadow of the self-proclaimed Islamic State, ISIS, swept through northern Iraq. Iraq's regular armies disintegrated in just a few days. ISIS was only a few dozen kilometers away from Baghdad and the Iranian border. While Washington was still discussing whether to intervene, a transport plane landed in Baghdad in the middle of the night. Stepping down the stairs was a silver-haired man, carrying no medals on his chest. "I am here," Soleimani said briefly to the Iraqi leaders. This was the strangest period in modern history. In the sky, US planes bombed ISIS. On the ground, Qasem Soleimani directly commanded militia forces to reclaim every street. For the first time, the ghost general revealed himself. Photos of him drinking tea with soldiers on the battlefield flooded social media. He became a symbol of courage, the man who dared to stand up when everyone else fled. But behind that bravery was a deep political calculation. Through the war against ISIS, Soleimani legalized his proxy armies into a part of Iraq's national security forces. If Iraq was where Soleimani practiced his ability to manipulate political chess pieces, then Syria was where he made a life-and-death gamble to protect Iran's strategic corridor. When the Arab Spring wave swept through Damascus in 2011, Bashar al-Assad's regime seemed set to collapse in just a few months. For Tehran, Syria was not just an ally, it was the only bridge to supply Hezbollah in Lebanon and an outpost against Israeli influence. If Syria fell into the hands of pro-Western rebels or Sunni extremist groups, Iran would be pushed back to its old borders, completely isolated. Soleimani understood he could not save Assad with words alone. He began establishing a massive logistics campaign that modern military history has rarely seen. Daily, Mahan air transport flights, a civilian airline but actually a tool of Quds, took off from Tehran toward Damascus, carrying weapons, telecommunications equipment, and most importantly, elite military advisors. However, the Syrian army at that time was crumbling. Soleimani made a bold decision, to internationalize the Syrian civil war in a direction favorable to Iran. He mobilized thousands of Hezbollah fighters from Lebanon and formed the Fatimiyyun division from Afghan refugees and the Zainabiyun division from Pakistanis. This was a multinational army bound by Shiite ideology, trained and paid directly from the Quds Force's budget. The climax of this intervention was in 2015. Despite Iran's assistance, the Syrian army continued to lose territory to rebel groups and ISIS. Soleimani knew he needed a stronger lever. On a secret flight to Moscow, this general directly presented to Vladimir Putin a coordinated plan. The Russian Air Force would master the skies, while Quds proxy forces would master the ground. The combination of Russian military technology and the death-defying nature of the fighters under Soleimani created a historic turning point. The Battle of Aleppo in 2016 was the clearest evidence of the brutality and effectiveness of this strategy. Soleimani frequently appeared at outposts closest to the enemy, not wearing a bulletproof vest, standing over maps amidst a rain of artillery. His presence boosted the soldiers' morale to the extreme, turning them into actual war machines. Syria was saved, but the price paid was a devastated country and deep hatred from rival Arab powers. How could a force that is among the most heavily sanctioned in the world, like Quds, maintain operations costing billions of dollars every year? The answer lies in the shadow economic empire that Soleimani painstakingly built. The Quds Force are not just special forces, they are entrepreneurs and financiers operating in the shadows. Quds resources come from an economic tentacle network spanning from banks in Baghdad to construction companies in Beirut and currency exchange units in Dubai. In Iraq, after toppling Saddam Hussein, pro-Iranian politicians helped Quds control lucrative reconstruction contracts. Front companies were set up to import goods, but in reality, they were used to wash money and transport missile components. When the US tightened financial sanctions, Quds used a system called Hawala, a traditional money transfer method based on trust between agents, leaving no digital traces on the international banking system. Another massive source of income came from controlling border crossings and oil smuggling. In Syria and Iraq, Quds proxy armies frequently controlled oil wells and sold it on the black market. This money never flowed into the Iranian national budget but flowed directly into Quds' operational fund to bribe tribal leaders, fund propaganda TV channels, and equip militia groups with modern weapons. The sophistication of this network was so great that even the US Treasury Department admitted that completely cutting off Quds' cash flow was an almost impossible task. Every time an entity was blacklisted, 10 others sprouted up under different names. Soleimani turned Quds into a state within a state, a self-sufficient financial entity, making them unaffected by economic fluctuations within Iran or pressure from the international community. This was the backbone that allowed Iran to maintain its extraterritorial power for 2 decades. To maintain an extraterritorial empire spanning thousands of kilometers, Qasem Soleimani needed not just death-defying gunmen but a sophisticated nervous system, a global intelligence network capable of penetrating the most secure places of the opponent. The Quds Force, under Soleimani's molding, turned Iranian embassies in the Middle East, Africa, and even South America into intelligence coordination centers. Quds agents were not like polished CIA officers, they could be a carpet merchant, an international student, or a cleric at Islamic cultural centers. The mission of this network was not just to collect information but to prepare for Judgment Day. In countries like Azerbaijan or Thailand, Quds sleeper networks were discovered while quietly stockpiling explosives and monitoring Western targets. Soleimani believed that to protect Iran, he must have the ability to strike back at the opponent anywhere in the world. It was this network that helped Iran bypass Israel's security loopholes, carrying out cyber attacks targeting water and energy systems, and assisting Hezbollah in building precision weapon stockpiles right at the opponent's border that Mossad could not completely prevent. The danger of Quds lay in the fact that they never slept, they patiently waited for the opponent's lapses, turning every corner of the world into a potential battlefield. For 2 decades, the name Qasem Soleimani always sat in the most prominent position on the blacklists of the world's leading intelligence agencies. This was a battle of wits where the price paid was not just lives, but the honor of an entire power. Mossad, the legendary Israeli intelligence agency, spent years trying to penetrate the inner circle of this general. They almost touched him during a meeting between Hezbollah leaders in Damascus in 2008, but complex diplomatic rules or the intervention of involved parties meant the missile was never launched. Soleimani knew he was being hunted. He changed his travel habits at a breakneck pace, frequently using unannounced civilian flights and never using a standard mobile phone. He absolutely trusted his instincts and the loyalty of his guards. However, the CIA and Mossad played a longer game. They were not just hunting the man, they were hunting his influence. Every assassination of Iranian nuclear scientists, every explosion at Hezbollah ammunition depots was a warning sent to Soleimani. But instead of backing down, this general plunged even deeper into hotspots, as a way of challenging destiny. This overconfidence, combined with the fact that he began to appear publicly more often to build the image of a national hero, accidentally created cracks in his invisible protective armor. US satellite eyes and sophisticated listening devices began to narrow the gap, waiting for a single mistake to end the greatest cat-and-mouse game of the 21st century. Beside the gunfights and battles of wits, the true strength of Quds lay in its extraordinary logistical capability. Soleimani established an air bridge connecting Tehran with every battlefield. Every night, while the world was sleeping, giant transport planes from airlines like Mahan Air or Syrian Air glided through the darkness, carrying shipments that no customs dared to check. These were advanced unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs, guided missile components, and millions of units of blood reserves for the fighters. This transport tactic was sophisticated because it utilized the very loopholes of international law regarding civilian aviation. The US knew exactly what those planes were carrying, but they could not shoot down a flight full of civilian passengers without causing a global crisis. Soleimani turned passengers and crew into involuntary human shields for his empire. On the ground, Quds also built land routes through the uninhabited desert areas of Iraq and Syria, where convoys of containers followed one another under the escort of loyal armed militia groups. This logistical operational capability ensured that no matter how much Iran was surrounded, its proxy armies never lacked ammunition to fight. This was the lifeblood maintaining the vitality of the axis of resistance before the suffocating pressure of sanctions. In the final days of 2019, the Middle East was like a powder keg waiting for a spark. In Iraq, a wave of anti-government protests rose, and clashes between pro-Iranian militia groups and the US military occurred repeatedly. Qasem Soleimani, with the instinct of someone who always appears at the eye of the storm, decided to fly to Baghdad. According to later reports, he carried an important message aimed at stabilizing the situation and consolidating Tehran's position before increasing pressure from Washington. On January 2, 2020, Soleimani left Damascus on a civilian flight by Cham Wings. He moved quietly, but did not know that his every move had been narrowed into a red circle on the operation screen at the U.S. Central Command, CENTCOM. When the plane landed at Baghdad International Airport at midnight, Abu Mahdi al-Muhandis, head of the Kataib Hezbollah militia, was waiting at the airplane stairs to welcome his brother. Two black SUVs rolled away from the airport in the deathly silence of the Baghdad suburbs. At an altitude of thousands of meters, two US MQ-9 Reaper drones were hovering, making no sound. After receiving confirmation orders directly from the White House, the remote pilots pressed the fire button. 3 Hellfire missiles plummeted with extreme speed. An explosion tore through the night, turning the two vehicles into burning blocks of scrap metal. In that moment, the architect of the axis of resistance vanished into history. What remained was only a red ruby stone ring, the inseparable object that helped identify his body among the wreckage. Soleimani's death immediately pushed the US and Iran into the most dangerous direct confrontation since 1979. In Tehran, Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei shed tears before the coffin of his most trusted general, swearing to carry out a crushing revenge. The whole world held its breath and watched. Could this be the beginning of World War III? A few days later, Iran responded by launching dozens of ballistic missiles at the US and Al-Assad air base in Iraq. This was the first time Iran directly attacked the US military from its own territory. However, by a strange restraint from both sides, the conflict did not escalate into a full-scale war. The US declared there were no casualties, while Iran asserted they had sent a strong enough message. But the price of this revenge was another tragedy. In a state of high alert, Iranian air defense forces accidentally shot down a Ukrainian civilian plane, killing 176 people. This event dealt a heavy blow to Tehran's image right at the moment they were calling for national unity after Soleimani's death. His departure not only left a massive power vacuum in the Quds Force but also forced Iran to redefine its entire extraterritorial strategy when the opponent was ready to play their cards openly. 3 years after Soleimani's death, the Quds Force under the leadership of General Esmail Qani has seen significant changes. No longer having the star style and strong personal presence of his predecessor, Qani manages Quds in a more methodical, administrative, and discreet way. However, the network that Soleimani built still exists and has even become more autonomous. Groups like Hezbollah, the Houthis, or Shiite militias in Iraq no longer need direct guidance in every battle. They have become independent political military entities with formidable combat capabilities. The historical lesson from the life of Qasem Soleimani is a testament to the power of persistence and asymmetric warfare tactics. He proved that a nation, despite being economically besieged, can still become a regional power through building trust and alliances in the shadows. Soleimani has gone down in history as one of the most controversial figures of the 21st century, a hero savior for persecuted Shiites, but a demon spreading terror for the West and Arab rivals. To this day, the ghost of Soleimani still lingers across the streets of Baghdad, Damascus, and Beirut. Iran's extraterritorial intelligence empire did not collapse with his death. On the contrary, it has become an inseparable part of Middle Eastern geopolitics. His life is a reminder that in the chess game of great powers, characters standing in the shadows are sometimes the true drivers of history. Ladies and gentlemen, we have gone through a long journey of nearly 10,000 words to peel back each layer of mystery about the Quds Force and the legendary General Qasem Soleimani. From a poor boy in an Iranian village to the man who redrew the map of the Middle East, Soleimani lived and died in exactly the way he chose, in the shadows and under fire. Thank you for listening to this special historical dossier. If you want to learn more deeply about the specific campaigns of Hezbollah or the mystery of the cyber war between Iran and Israel, please leave your comments. I am your historian, and I will see you again in the next chapters of the flow of world history.